If she doesn't respect you, she won't love you. Simple. And the truth. Most men never realize when they're silently handing away their power. In this video, I'll show you 7 subtle behaviors that instantly make her see you as weak, and more importantly, how to flip the script before it's too late. Let's get into it. Number 1, you avoid conflict to keep peace. You tell yourself it's maturity. That biting your tongue, walking on eggshells, and letting things slide is the high road. That avoiding conflict makes you evolved. But she doesn't see it that way. What she sees a man too. Afraid to disrupt comfort even when the situation demands confrontation. A man who lets himself get minimized, dismissed, or quietly disrespected, just to keep the atmosphere light. But here's the truth she never tell you out loud. Every time you suppress your truth in the name of keeping things calm, you're silently shrinking in her eyes. Not because you are being kind, but because you're being spineless. And the more often you do it, the more she starts to view Yunit as emotionally intelligent, but emotionally timid. Women don't need perfection, they need strength. That doesn't mean aggression, it means backbone. And conflict is the ultimate test of that. Can you express your displeasure without exploding? Can you hold your frame when something doesn't sit right? Can you make her feel your standards, not just through sweet words, but through how you react when those standards are tested? Avoiding conflict may seem like the safe option in themament, but it always comes at a cost. And that cost is respect. Because a man who avoids discomfort to avoid disapproval is a man who has meta validation his God. And you cannot lead, you cannot protect, and you cannot hold space if your core driver is the fear of rocking the boat. She doesn't consciously want a man who argues, but she deeply respects a man who will confront what needs to be confronted. If she says something out of line, tests you emotionally, or plays subtle control games, and your reaction is to smooth it over, change the subject, or nervously it off. She may smile in themament, but deep down she's disappointed. Why? Because she worshipping you'd show her that you're not just emotionally available, but emotionally solid. She wanted to feel that she was in the presence of a man who can hold tension, not run from it. And if you can't even disagree with her without guilt, how can she trust you totally during chaos? What you might think is diplomacy, she sees as emotional cowardice. And here's the silent killer. Most men don't even know they're doing this. They say yes when they mean no. They pretend something didn't bother them. They rationalize her bad behavior best she was just in a mood. They are so terrified of being too much or too difficult that they keep filtering themselves until there's nothing left of them to respect. And once that happens, the polarity dies, the desire fades, and what's left is a woman emotionally bored by the man she once admired. Not because it changed, but because she finally saw his fear dressed up as gentleness. Conflict avoided is truth denied. And there is nothing more repelling to a feminine woman than a man who hides his truth to avoid her reaction. Number 2, you over-apologize. There's a difference between being accountable and being apologetic for your existence. Most men don't realize when that line gets crossed because from childhood they were taught to be agreeable, to avoid friction, to always make others feel comfortable, even if it meant making themselves feel small. Softly grow into adults who say sorry without even knowing what they're sorry for. They apologize for expressing a boundary, for disagreeing, for needing space, for simply being themselves. And at first, a woman might see that askingness. She may even interpret it as emotional awareness. But over time, that constant apologizing begins to erode something much more vital than connection, respect. Every time you apologize unnecessarily, you send her a message loud and clear that your worth is negotiable, that your presence is a favor, not a gift, that you're so unsure of yourself, you'd rather shrink than risk being misunderstood. And no woman is drawn to a man who doubts his own place. She may not say anything the first few times you do it, but the more you lead with apology instead of certainty, the more she starts to feel like she's in the emotional lead. And that shift is subtle but devastating once she sees herself as emotionally superior to you. That polarity starts to collapse. The attraction weakens, and without attraction, love can't breathe. There's something profoundly unattractive about a man who seeks forgiveness for every truth he speaks. It makes her feel like she's in the presence of a boy, someone who hasn't yet claimed his masculine essence. Real men don't walk into rooms asking for permission to exist. They walk in with quiet confidence, grounded in who they are, not because they're arrogant, but because they've made peace with their imperfections. A strong man owns his energy. He doesn't over-explain, he doesn't tiptoe. And when he does offer an apology, it's measured, sincere, and rare. That rarity is what gives it power. Because when you apologize for everything, your words start to lose weight. You become background noise, always pleasing, never leading. And here's what most men miss. Women don't just listen to your words, they feel your energy. You can say, "I'm sorry," 100 different ways. But if it's coming from fear, not awareness, she feel that. She feels the hesitancy, the shame, the need to be liked more than the desire to be real. And over time, that emotional posture starts to feel like a burden. It creates an imbalance where she's forced to be emotionally secure one while you orbit around her approval. That kind of dynamic might feel safe, but it kills desire because women don't fall in love with men who beg for peace. They fall in love with men who carry peace within them. Not because they avoid mistakes, but because they trust themselves enough to stand by their decisions without folding every time someone else reacts. And once she sees that you're constantly asking pardon instead of presence, she no longer feels guided, grounded, or gripped by your energy. Number 3, you seek her validation. When a man constantly needs to hear, "I still care about you," "I still want you," or "you're doing okay," what he's really doing is outsourcing his self-worth. And the moment a woman feels that burden, the unspoken demand to constantly reassure you, soothe your insecurity, or become your emotional caretaker, something in her starts to shut down. Not because she's cold, not because she's heartless, but because the attraction is rooted in polarity. And when a man abandons his center to chase emotional approval, he's no longer standing in his masculine. He becomes emotionally dependent. And there is nothing more suffocating to a woman than being put in the position of validating a man who doesn't know how to validate himself. This shows up in subtle ways. You text her just to make sure everything's okay. You read between the lines of her every word, tone, or emoji. You ask, "Are we good?" after every disagreement. You need her to mirror back affection before you feel safe enough to express yours. And maybe y'all think you're just being communicative, emotionally open, or transparent. But what she's experiencing is the slow bleed of your confidence. Because when you constantly ask for reassurance, what you're really doing is telling her you don't feel secure in your own emotional foundation. You're hoping she carry you through your doubt. You're making her the source of your certainty. And that will always make her feel more like your emotional babysitter than your romantic partner. Women are drawn to men who project certainty, not perfection, but clarity. When a man knows who he is, what he's worth, and what he brings to the table, he doesn't need constant reminders from the outside to keep showing up as that man. His presence alone speaks louder than any reassurance. But the man who needs constant confirmation becomes predictable, emotionally needy, and eventually forgettable. Why? Because a validation seeking kills mystery. It kills strength, and most fatally, it kills desire. A woman cannot be magnetized by a man who's always asking her to feed his ego in order for him to function. And here's the silent truth that most men never hear. Validation isn't connection, it's compensation. You're not building intimacy when you beg for approval. You're trying to patch a leak in your self-worth. And eventually that leak becomes too loud to ignore. She starts pulling away. You panic. You lean in harder. You need more information, more proof, more words. And the more you ask, the more you emotionally exhausted she becomes. Not because you are too much, but because you're recoming from too little internal certainty, too little emotional grounding, too little trust in your ability to be seen without asking to be praised. A man who needs her validation all the time becomes a mirror she no longer wants to hold up because it keeps reflecting a version of him that hasn't yet decided he's enough without her applause. Number 4, you tolerate disrespect. Disrespect doesn't always come with screaming insults or chaos. Sometimes it's quiet, subtle, coated in sarcasm, rolled into backhanded dumplings, laced into small dismissals that you pretend not to notice because you are afraid that speaking up might ruin the vibe. And this is where the slow decay of masculine power begins, not when she openly challenges you, but when she tests you and you passively accept it. When she interrupts you mid-sentence and you laugh it off. When she criticizes your opinions in front of others and you pretend it's no big deal. When she makes decisions for the both of you without your input and you go along just to keep things smooth. Every time that you do that, you're not being easygoing, you're being silently dominated. And the more you tolerate it, the more you train her to believe you're the kind of man who can be disrespected without conceits. Women test boundaries not because they're toxic, but because they're wired to seek strength. It's not a conscious game. It's primal. She wants to feel that the man she's with has an internal compass so strong it cannot be moved by mood swings, manipulation, or emotional baiting. But when you let her cross a line and say nothing, when you act like it didn't bother you just to avoid confrontation, what she feels isn't relief. What she feels is disappointment. Not because she wants you to argue, but because she was hoping you'd show her that you actually have lines, standards, a spine, something more sacred than your desire to be liked. And when that doesn't show up, when your tolerance becomes your trademark, she stops trusting you, not just as a man, but as a leader. What most men don't realize is that disrespect only continues where respect was never demanded. The moment you allow poor behavior to slide once, you've set a new baseline for what's acceptable, and from there, it only grows. Not because she's cruel, but because she no longer believes your presence carries weight. When a man lets himself be minimized in the name of keeping a woman, he ends up losing her anyway. But no, with the added weight of emasculation, and it doesn't always happen loudly. Sometimes it's quiet. She stops looking at you with admiration, stops asking for your opinion, stops leaning into your presence. Why? Because in her subconscious, you've now become the man she has to emotionally lead, not one she respects enough to follow. You may think you're being patient, that you're choosing peace, that letting small things go makes you the bigger person. But she doesn't see it that way. She sees a man who doesn't value himself enough to enforce standards, a man who's more afraid of losing her than he is of losing his self-respect. And there is nothing more unattractive to a woman than a man who betrays himself just to keep access to her attention. Number 5, you don't set boundaries. Most men confuse boundaries with rejection. They believe that if they say no, pull back, or assert a standard, they'll push her away. So they bend. They accommodate. They tolerate behavior that doesn't sit right with them just to keep the connection going. But what they fail to see is that every time they ignore that internal discomfort in order to preserve harmony, they're not preserving anything. They're silently negotiating away their masculine eprison. Women don't respect a man who is always agreeable. They don't admire someone who lets their lines get blurred just to stay in someone else's good graces. They may smile. They may say thank you. They may even lean in at first. But underneath that surface presence is a growing sense of disinterest, because deep down she's registering the absence of structure, the absence of self-worth, the absence of emotional command. When a man lacks boundaries, he's not choosing love. He's choosing fear. Fear of conflict, fear of being disliked, fear of being left. Butyn, trying to avoid being abandoned, he ends up abandoning himself. And nothing kills attraction faster than a man who betrays his own values just to keep access to someone else's attention. It's not always about the big things either. It's how you let her cancel plans last minute without saying anything. It's how you allow passive-aggressive comments to slide because you don't want to come off sensitive. It's how you agree to things that drain you just to avoid looking difficult. These may feel like harmless compromise, but in her mind they are signals, markers that you're not grounded, that your emotional landscape is easy to manipulate, that you'd rather chosen than respected. And here's the part no one tells you. Women secretly want you to say no. Not all the time and not with arrogance, but with calm, unshakable clarity. They want to know you can walk away from what violates your peace. They want to feel that your presence is earned, not automatic, because when a man sets a boundary, what's really saying is, I know who I am and I know what I stand for. Thatcher Tainty is magnetic. It doesn't matter if she agrees with your limits. What matters is that you have them. What matters is that you enforce them with outrage and without apology. Because the man who calmly honors his own limit teaches her how to treat him, not through punishment but through presence. Without boundaries, you become emotionally leaky, you overextend, you over-explain. You make exceptions until you don't even recognize yourself anymore, and she sees it. She watches you stretch beyond your capacity just to keep her happy. And a quiet voice inside of her begins to question your depth, because if you won't protect your own space, how will you ever protect hers? If you can't hold the line with her, how will you hold it in life? A man horfices to set boundaries becomes emotionally weightless, always agreeable, never impactful, and eventually invisible in her eyes. Number 6, you overshare emotion too fast. Emotional depth is powerful, but when you offer it too soon, too openly, and without invitation, it stops buying depth. It starts feeling like desperation. What most men don't realize is that emotional vulnerability is not attractive in isolation. It becomes attractive when it's earned. When it's offered with discernment, when it comes from a place of power, not a place of panic. But many men, in the name of being real or being transparent, unload their entire emotional landscape within first few conversations. They think they're creating intimacy when what they are actually creating is pressure. They reveal their insecurities, their childhood wounds, their fears, their relationship trauma, their emotional tendency without building the foundation of trust that could actually hold that level of disclosure. And the woman, instead of feeling drawn in, starts to feel burdened. It's not that she doesn't care. It's that she hasn't been given the chance to feel safe enough with you to want to hold that emotional weight. When a man offers his full internal world too early, he's no longer mysterious, he's exposed. And that exposure, when not earned, doesn't feel like connection. It feels like a collapse, like he's leaning too heavily on her to complete the emotional work he hasn't done within himself. Emotional maturity isn't about how much you cancry or confess. It's about how well you can contain your truth with grace. A man who truly understands himself doesn't need to announce his pain at the first sign of affection. He sits in it, processes, selectively shares it when the bond is strong enough to hold it. That's what makes it powerful. That's what makes it sacred, and that's what makes her feel safe in your emotional world instead of overwhelmed by it. Too many men confuse emotional dumping with emotional intimacy. But women are intuitive. They can feel when you're rushing from groundness versus when you're spilling out of a need to be saved. The moment you start oversharing in the early stages, she doesn't see strength, she sees instability. And whether she knows it consciously or not, something in her energy starts to pull back. Not because she lacks empathy, but because she senses you're asking her to do a job you haven't yet done for yourself. She feels like she's been invited into chaos before. She's adventuresome to enter the room. And when that happens, attraction withers because women are drawn to strength, not performative stoicism, but emotional clarity. They want to know you have emotions, but more importantly, they want to know you hold them. When you expose too much too fast, you rob the connection of the natural tension that builds genuine desire. There's no space for curiosity, no space for the dance. You've put all your cards on the table before she even sat down to play. And no, instead of feeling intrigued, she feels like she has to manage your emotional needs before she's even decided who you really are. Number 7, you're always available. There's a difference between being consistent and being constant liable. A man who is always available, always replying within seconds, always ready to drop his world to be at her service. He may believe as showing dedication, loyalty, interest, but what she feels is different. What she feels is a man who has no mission outside of her. A man who treats her attention like oxygen, not an addition to an already meaningful life. And no matter how emotionally linked she is, no matter how kind or open-hearted, a part of her will start to disconnect because feminine energy doesn't desire what it doesn't have to reach for. The moment you make yourself emotional concierge to her every whim, You stop being a man with gravity and start becoming an emotional accessory. Always around, always eager, always forgettable. It's not about playing games or being elusive. It's about being rooted in something larger than her. Purpose, direction, vision. When a man moves from his mission, his energy shifts. He stops being reactive. He stops being needy. He stops orbiting her moods and texts and instead becomes a center of his own gravity. That kind of man doesn't need to pretend he's busy. He is busy, he's building, evolving, deciding, moving. And from that space, his availability isn't constant. It's intentional, it's precious, it's rare. And that rarity is what creates desire. Because the truth is, a woman can't crave what she always has unlimited access to. And if she never has to wonder where you stand, what you're doing, or how your time is, being spent, she loses a key ingredient of romantic polarity, curiosity. When you're always available, she doesn't feel chosen. She feels smothered. She doesn't interpret your constant presence as strength. She interprets it as a lack of independence. And independence is what makes a man emotionally attractive, not because he's distant or cold, but because he doesn't rely on her to complete him. He engages because he wants to, not because he needs a hit off reference. That difference, the subtle, changes everything. It's the energy behind your responses. It's the way you carry yourself when you're not texting. It's the rhythm of your presence that gives her the space to feel your absence. And in that absence, feel your value. A man who is always available teaches her that his time is valuable, that his schedule is always open, that his priorities are flexible if she so much as lifts a finger. And while that might feel like love to him, to her it feels like lack of self-respect, lack of ambition, lack of mystery. The feminine desires enter a man's world, not become his entire world. And when you offer yourself too completely, too frequently, without boundaries or pauses, she no longer feels magnetized. She feels emotionally responsible for keeping Thespark alive. And the moment that happens, she slowly starts to pull away, not because you were too present, but because your presence lost its power through excess. Weakness isn't in being emotional. It's in giving your power away quietly, repeatedly, and without even realizing it. Women don't lose respect for you overnight. They lose it in the moments you thought didn't matter. When you avoid conflict, over-apologize, crave validation, accept disrespect, dodge boundaries, overshare too soon, or make yourself too available, you don't just lose her interest, you lose your center. But here's the truth. No one told you. You can get it back. Respect starts when you stop seeking it and start embodying it. Not by playing games, not by pretending to be alpha, but by choosing self-respect over fear, boundaries over approval, and purpose over emotional survival. Become the man you were too afraid to be, and watch how the world and she respond differently. Fixed desizing is not for her, but for